Okay, everybody, off to Mark's mini lecture part two. So, in part one, we established that Marx is an Aristotelian. He has an idea of human flourishing. That idea of human flourishing is defined by that special human thing. That special human thing is free and conscious life activity. Humans are makers, producers, and in a way very different from animals. We make freely and consciously, and we make universally. The entire world is available to the human animal for some kind of production, some kind of making. No other animal has that kind of relationship to the entire world universally. So that's what Marx thinks is the special human thing. And that's when we are most fully human, is when we are freely and consciously engaging in life activity. It sounds very abstract, I know, but try to give it some examples in your own mind. Under capitalism, there's been this kind of distortion of that process. So something weird is going on under capitalism, which is a recent historical phenomenon. It's happening as Marx is growing up. It's all around him, and it's often in its ugliest form. And he wants us to notice that it's doing something to distort this flourishing that we should be able to engage in. And that is the measure of our flourishing. And the word he uses for that, actually, he must use different German words, but in English, there's two words, alienation and estrangement. The section that you're reading is from is called estranged labor. So alienation, estrangement, not being yourself, not in your full humanness, some kind of gap between who you are and who you should be. Things aren't quite right. So this is where we get into the list of alienation in the first part of your reading. So I went to the end to get to the goal, the telos for flourishing for Marx. And now we go back and look at his description of when things aren't working well, what he calls alienation. So under capitalism, the bulk of that kind of free and conscious life activity we should be engaged in is put in the service of making profit for a particular class of society that owns the means of production. So at the heart of capitalism are two classes: the owners of the means of production and those who don't own the means of production and must work for wages. That's just descriptively true. No judgment being made yet by Marx. So in that kind of system, there's a lot of activity, life activity. Humans are doing lots of things, but it's done mostly as wage labor. It's mostly getting in the service of making a wage. So in other words, activity of the worker is wage labor rather than free and conscious life activity. Now, one of the tricky things conceptually, I think, when you think about Marx, is this is maybe not, it's like a structural difference. The estrangement is structural. So let me put it this way. You could imagine making a loaf of bread. I don't know if there's any bread bakers out there. You know what? Let's make a pizza. Let's make a pizza because we're going to come back to do the right thing. You're making a pizza at home, maybe from fresh dough that you made. You bake it for some friends. You've made a pizza. Now, let's say you also make pizza at work as a job. You get paid to make pizza. Same activity, pizza making in both cases. But one is free and conscious life activity, Marx would call it, in the service of your being a human being. And the other is for the sake of making money. Now, this seems quite natural to us. This is the way our world works. That's it. We get it. Nothing radical about this, except that Marx wants to call it estrangement. He wants us to see that the wage labor version of making a pizza is not the same as the free and conscious life activity version of making a pizza. They're just different. And you could try to come up with your own language about why they're different, and if it makes a difference that they're different. For Marx, it does. So in being an activity that's done for the sake of a wage, that's where Marx starts to list in this big paragraph on page 74 the many ways that this is alienating or alienated, maybe, or estranged. So the activity is done for the sake of the wage. The activity, in a sense, is forced because wages are needed to live. You need to engage in that pizza making in order to get paid money so that you can live. Yes, so that's the core idea. And this core idea generates the full list of all the other things that are described on 74, right under that sentence, what then constitutes the alienation of labor. So I'm just going to list them, repeat what he puts in that paragraph. The wage labor activity is not generated out of the worker's essential being. So abstract philosophical talk, but it's not like the making a pizza at home for your friends. It's not, the place it comes from is different. It comes from a need to secure wages. The person who's engaged in that wage labor often is not content, but unhappy. There's an experiential level where this feels like a chore. It's a different kind of work than making a pizza to enjoy with your friends. Often, especially in Marx's day, does not develop oneself, but ruins body and mind. So as capitalism was getting going in England, you could look around you and see the ruined state, literally, physically, and mentally, of wage laborers and the conditions they were brought to. We see that less in our immediate world in America, although it's there to be seen. And I'm sure many of you have seen what wage labor can do to people. And of course, there are places in the world where there's quite extreme and dramatic versions of the ruinous nature of this kind of wage labor and the kind of poverty it leaves people in. So that is still going on. Then also, as Marx puts it, and trying to get us to see it as weird, the wage laborer feels human outside of work. It's when you get off work that you feel like you have your life back, while feeling inhuman at work. Now, again, why is that weird? Because of the flourishing idea. So if we make pizzas, that can be a free and conscious life activity, but because it's wage labor, you feel inhuman doing it. So you're doing the things that a human can do to flourish, but because of the capitalist structure, you feel inhuman while you're doing it. Not voluntary, but forced, he says, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, forced in the sense that you need wages in order to survive, and not the satisfaction of a human need, but a means to satisfy basic needs. So that pizza making, which again, if you make it at home for friends, is combining all these different things one can do as a human. But at work, you got to get the money to get basic food and shelter. So there's two different, the same activity, two different feelings to them. One's estranged and one isn't, according to Marx. Also, the product of the labor does not belong to the worker, but to somebody else. So you make a pizza at your job, and it belongs to the person who owns that mode of production, that owns the pizza shop or the pizza factory or whatever. So even in the making of it, there's this estrangement or alienation between the human activity of having made a pizza, but as a wage laborer, doesn't belong to me. That thing I made is not mine. Marx thinks that's weird, and we should notice that. And in fact, the worker also belongs to that other person as a wage laborer. So there's also the estrangement, alienation, weirdness of being employed by the owners of means of production to kind of being a product oneself, a commodity. So the worker is like the pizza in being their labor is owned by somebody else. Again, Marx is just trying to say philosophically, objectively, weird thing. That's a weird thing, he wants to say, and we should think about it. And then he uses some language toward the end that it's just overall, it's a loss of self. It's not an enriching of life, but a loss of life, a distortion of human flourishing, of what humans would look like at their best. Okay, So remember I told you at the start of lecture one, part 1 of 2 on Marx, that Marx feels very strongly that this is an upsetting kind of situation, that we should ultimately do something about it, but do try to keep distinct the descriptive part. Is he describing something that's accurate about modern life? And then if so, then there's a second question: if anything should be done about it, what could be done about it? But the way we're folding this into the class ultimately is to connect this back to Spike Lee's movie Do the Right Thing, and to the idea that we, in our moral lives, we operate in a structural environment as well. And capitalism is one of those big structures that we operate in. And it's to have a morally flourishing life, you need to understand that. You need to understand how it works, and you need to understand what it does to people's lives. So if you think about the movie in particular, I think where you could see very specific examples of this is to think about whether or not Sal has some kind of human satisfaction in owning his own pizza place that other people in that neighborhood aren't getting to have. Is that place and the project of making pizza that feeds the neighborhood, does it give him some kind of flourishing, some kind of fullness of life that other people aren't getting? And as a wage laborer for Sal, how should we think about Mookie's life activity compared to Sal's? So if you think about Mookie wanting to make his money, he is using his life activity, his day, his energy, his human energy to get wages in order to survive. And so he's engaged in a different kind of life than Sal, one could say. All right, that was the whirlwind tour of Marx, the early Marx as a moral philosopher, in order to help us talk about structural features of the neighborhood that's at work, in our own lives, but clearly also in Do the Right Thing. So look forward to talking with you all about that.